In this short video, I want to talk about what are equivalent fractions. So we have three examples here that I just want to walk through. So let's look at the one in the upper left. These three guys, those are equivalent fractions. And what makes them equivalent fractions is each one of them is the same size, right? The overall length is the same in all three of those, right? But they're divided up into different numbers of pieces. In the case, this is divided into 3 pieces, this is divided into 6 pieces, and this is divided into 12. Now what makes them equivalent is the fact that the same amount of the overall rectangle is shaded in all three. That's what makes them equivalent. So no matter how many pieces they're cut into, they cover up the same amount of the overall figure. Each covers exactly the same amount. That's what makes them equivalent. Here's another example. Look at the pies over here, right? These are 4 equivalent fractions. And again, what makes them equivalent is not how many pieces they're cut into, but how much of the circle or how much of the pie they cover. Each one of those covers up half of the pie. Yep. So no matter how many pieces they're cut into, they always cover up half of it. So 1/2, 2/4, 3/6, and 4/8. Those are all equivalent fractions. Yep. Because even though they're cut up into different numbers of pieces, if they're cut up into 2 pieces, for example, it requires just 1 piece. But if they're cut up into 4 pieces, then we have to use 2 of the pieces to cover up half. So that's the 2 on top. If they're cut into 6 pieces, we have to use 3 because the pieces are going to be smaller, right? There's more of them. And if they're cut into 8 pieces, then we're going to have 4 pieces in order to have this cover the same amount of the pie. Last one is this big intimidating looking chart of all these different fractions, and you can look at them. For example, let's look at these first 2. Those are equivalent fractions, 1/2 and 2/4, because both of them, even though one's turned from the other one, they both cover the same amount of the circle. So those are, if you look at these next 2, 2/3 and 4/6, they take up the same amount. The 2/8 and 1/4, same thing there. So it might be worth your while to take a minute, pause the video, and go through and try to circle like I did all of the equivalent fractions. So pause it a minute and see if you can get through all of them. All right, let's just run through some of them real quick. All right. So let's see, here's 1/3 and 2/6, those are the same, 6/8 and 3/4. It looks like most of them are, take up two pictures. So here, those 2 are equivalent. 2/2 and 3/3, right? Each one covers up the whole thing. 3/5 and 6/10, those are equivalent. 1/5 and 2/10. 2/5 and 4/10. I think you're getting the idea, I hope. 4/5 and 8/10. All right, the last thing and the key part I want to talk about this, if we look at the back in the first figures in the upper left, we said 1/3 and 2/6 were equivalent fractions. And the interesting thing about this is that if you take each of the 2 numbers in the first fraction and you multiply them by 2, multiply that by 2 and this by 2, you get another equivalent fraction. So equivalent fractions are multiples of each other, right? And the important thing is that when you multiply them by something, you have to multiply the top and bottom by the same number. So these 2 divided times 2, both 1/3 makes 2/6, and 2/6 is equivalent to 4/12. And that's because, how did we get from 2 to 4, right? They doubled that. 2 times 2 is 4. 6 times 2 is 12. That's what makes them equivalent. They're both multiplied by the same number. The same thing, let's take the 4/5 and the 8/10 down here, right? 4/5 and 8/10, right? They're equivalent fractions because the top number of the 8/10 is double the 4, and the bottom number, the 10, is double the 5. So they're both multiplied by the same number. So any 2 fractions that one is a multiple of each other, both the numerator and denominator are the same multiple, those are going to be equivalent fractions. We'll do more with these for right now. I just want to make sure that you can recognize when 2 fractions are equivalent. Done.